The Grand Teton is arguably the most iconic mountain in all of North America. Every year, millions of people travel from all over the world to see it, but most take their selfie and leave without realizing the ancient history hidden at the top. In 1872, the first official expedition set out to explore this vast mountainous region. They wanted to summit the Grand Teton and receive the glory for being the first humans ever to do so. That was, until they found something. On July 29th, 1872, they set out for this monumental climb. As they neared the summit, they suddenly saw an ancient structure. People had been here. Who were they? When did they come? And why were they here? 150 years later, these questions remain unanswered. I recently set out alone to see this ancient ruin for myself and examine possible explanations to this enduring mystery.
Oh, it's about 3 a.m. We're going to start doing this thing. No park rangers this time of day. Oh wow. Check out that huge bull elk. It's a big boy. I don't know how well you guys can see him. It's a balmy 37 degrees out. Definitely. Now it's time to take it off. We're about to get rolling. As they say, be bold, start cold. There you go. Bear attack. This trail is pretty heavily trafficked, but since I'm traveling solo at night, definitely got the bear spray on the hip just in case. Back in May, there was a pretty severe grizzly attack. The guy didn't die, but definitely got pretty mauled up. It's just, I don't know, a couple miles from here. Maybe got an hour and a half till daylight. Well, we better settle in for a long haul. We've got, I think, about 15 miles round trip, 7,000 feet vert up, 7,000 feet down. It's a big, big day.
You did hear me correctly. To get to this site, it's going to take about 14,000 feet of total elevation gain and loss throughout the day. Any summit in the Teton Range involves an enormous amount of this. That's because what makes them so striking also makes them tiring to climb. It's something known in the mountain world as prominence. Basically, these things just shoot up out of the valley floor, with no foothills on this eastern side. Simply put, they are steep, pretty tall, and the trailheads are located at a low elevation, relatively speaking. This morning, I started about 6,800 feet above sea level. The summit of the Grand Teton sits at 13,775 feet.
A little bit of morning light coming up there. Still climbing. That'll be the theme of the day. Love that little sliver of moon up there. You guys ever imagine you'd be watching a sunrise with me in the Tetons? Glad you guys are along for the journey. Be a lonely ride otherwise. It's just a maze of mountain ranges up here. You've got the Absarokas over there where the sun's coming up. You know, you look more eastward, you got the Wind River Range stretching way over there. The highest peak in Wyoming is actually in there, Gannett Peak. You got the Gros Ventre Range over there. Jackson Hole Airport sits somewhere, I think, like right there. There you have it, my friends. That's Middle Teton there. Starting to see some of the splendors of the Teton Range. So this is the first boulder field we come to. Oh, look at that. A little bit of first light hitting the peak up there.
Shoo-wee. For you sentimental folks out there, Evelyn and I took one of our first photos, maybe here, maybe it was a different boulder, but it was definitely in this area. Just like the Grand Canyon, this part of the country's got a lot of special significance to me. Before I get in trouble with the boss, I should clarify it was our first ever picture together. We are heading way up there. There's some hikers on the trail there, way down there, just to give you an idea of scale. I know these mountains are hard to grasp. This shot might help put things into perspective as well, especially for those of you who have seen these mountains in person. All morning I've been ascending what's known as Garnet Canyon. Right now, I'm about here, looking down at the canyon floor below me. Just little dots down there. I'm about 10,500 feet now above sea level. Getting there. You can see the glaciers over there across the basin. So I'm directly above what's known as the Middle Teton Glacier, biggest glacier I've seen yet today. The Tetons have long had glaciers. The steep, high peaks and deeply carved canyons are the effects of Pleistocene-era glaciers who rumbled their way through this range. Those glaciers have long since melted, and the ones we see today are believed to have been formed some 500 years ago, during a period known as the Little Ice Age. These current glaciers are shrinking, and their fate remains unknown. On the topic of ice and glaciers, it's a fitting time to talk about human habitation of this region. That's because the current mainstream belief is that people moved into the Teton and Yellowstone area as soon as the glaciers receded from the last ice age, some 11 to 12,000 years ago. Untold generations of tribes would have known this area and its rich surplus of game. Surely, they had stories and significance connected to these towering peaks. Exactly what those were, well, we're going to take a look at that today. Possibly on the trail of these ancient humans, I kept climbing. I am headed up. This is known as the lower saddle. If you're not familiar with that, just think of like a horse saddle and the dip in that. So it's a terminology we use for topographic things. Get these marmots over here. Not a bad home, huh? There is the Grand, my friends. This one here. I believe where we're heading is possibly this peak over here. I know we've got to go up. This is what's known as the upper saddle. So, we're pretty much here at the lower saddle. The lower saddle is the last reliable place to get water. So I refilled, ate a snack, and then kept moving. I still had about 2,000 feet left to climb, and from here on out, it was going to get a lot steeper. Well, here's our first views into Idaho, right over here. It's definitely really smoky off in the distance, but thankfully it's pretty clear on this backside. So here's our objective, somewhere up there. That is the summit of the Grand Teton, or close to it. We're gonna contour up this way. The plot thickens and the mystery deepens because the peak I'm headed towards isn't the true summit of the Grand Teton. Rather, this ancient structure sits a short ways away on a separate prominence. Once I get up to about that black band, I'll probably put the helmet on. That's where it kind of gets like fourth classy up in there. I don't think I've mentioned yet, I've summited the Grand twice, but both times we were just so focused on the summit, I never went to see the structure. I learned of this mysterious ruin when I first summited the Grand Teton years ago. Of course I wanted to see it, but I ran out of time and energy. Last summer, I climbed it again on a different route. Once again, I ran out of motivation to push my body to go see it. Any summit of the Grand is a delicate balance between endurance and speed. Although world-class athletes can do it faster, I'm not one of those. A summit attempt will usually take between 14 to 18 hours of continuous movement over challenging terrain. But today, if I have my way, I'm going to lay eyes on this thing that I've wondered so much about. I'm having fun up here. Hope you guys are. I love the desert, I really do, and I love the mountains. I really do. Honestly, I wouldn't want to pick one or the other. I love them both, and I want them both. Pretty much topped out of where I'm gonna just be hiking. After this, I'd consider it scrambling, so I'm gonna put my helmet on, and it's a little bit more heads up after this, you know. There's the big glacier we saw earlier, the Middle Teton Glacier. We came up this canyon here called Garnet Canyon. And there you see just the ranges stretching out. You know, it's a little hazy out there for sure, but you still get an idea for just the vastness of this place. It stretches as far as the eye can see. Although I wouldn't consider this actual rock climbing, you still need to be attentive. Every year, the mountains claim careless, and sometimes just unlucky, people. In fact, during my descent, hours later, a search and rescue chopper came in and evacuated someone off the mountain. For what? I don't know. Ooh. Oh man, guys, we are so close. Look at that. All right, we have got to be there. Oh, this might be the edge of it right there. Let's go see. Huh. Yeah. Oh man, at long last, I'm seeing this thing in person. Wow. If you're sitting there and you're looking at that and you're saying, he climbed all the way up to look at a pile of rocks, it's so much more than that. You know, you gotta consider the story. You've gotta think about the location that we're at and try to imagine somebody 150, 200, 500, you know, who knows how many years people have been climbing up here and using this as... I lost my words because, well, we don't actually know a lot about this or what it's here for. There's a lot more to the story than might be apparent at first glance. So now that we're finally here, let's try to break it down. Here's the clear facts that we do know. On the morning of July 29th, 1872, 11 men from the Hayden expedition set out to climb the Grand Teton. They believed no other human had ever done it. All of them bailed before reaching the final push, except for two, James Stevenson and Nathaniel Langford. Those two eventually ended up on a buttress just west of the main summit, the same one I pointed out earlier. There's a big debate about whether or not Langford and Stevenson actually summited the Grand Teton or just made it to this point. But that's a controversy for another day. In Langford's diary, here's what he wrote about what they found. On one of the adjoining buttresses, we found a curiosity in the shape of granite slabs piled up on end, in circular form, 6 feet diameter, the space filled in with disintegrated granite, eroded from these vertical slabs. This was probably done hundreds of years ago. For hundreds of years must have been required to fill the space with granite fragments small as these. We were glad to come down from the extreme summit and find shelter in this enclosure. As a result of this journal entry, the structure has become known ever since as the enclosure. Here's an old black and white photograph of it, which I think is important to see because you realize the enclosure was more defined in the past. Weather, careless modern climbers, and the lack of native people maintaining it like they might have done for centuries has reduced the enclosure to what we see today. Ever since Langford recorded it in 1872, the enclosure has been the focal point of speculation as to its purpose and origin. At the time of Euro-American contact, this region contained numerous nomadic tribes. By some counts, over 20 different people groups. One of these, the Crow tribe, constructed small, circular structures known as fasting beds. These were places men went for vision quests, to receive insights into their destiny. The Crow say there was a man in their tribe who received a vision while fasting on top of the Tetons. This vision contained horses, and this man and a companion traveled very far south, returning 7 years later with the tribe's first horses. Some Crow elders believe the enclosure is the place where this vision was received. I don't doubt the story, but I think it likely this site was more than a one-off visitation. Perhaps it was a place of great power and significance, a sort of pilgrimage site. And using this as some sort of probably a ceremonial, religious sacred site. Wow. As I say that, there's like a whole whole flock of birds. A few interesting things to note. The enclosure is more of an oval than a true circle. The ends generally run north to south, and it appears there's an opening facing southward. Because of its location and orientation, some have speculated it was an ancient astronomical observatory. If this structure was only built once and then left to the elements, it's likely only a couple hundred years old, because in that time the slabs would collapse and look similar to what we see today. But if it was something that was maintained regularly by indigenous people, then there's no telling how many eons a structure like this could exist up here. Remember, Langford's observation in 1872 were that it looked quite old. To the north, this is also the Teton Range, kind of goes out of sight there into the smoke. Yellowstone National Park, that is, would be up in that region. You got a big lake, that's Jackson Lake there. The Middle Teton that looked so impressive at first, now looks pretty tiny. So this is the rest of the Teton Range going down there. You've got Jackson/Jackson Hole over there. Layers and layers of mountains. Regardless of the specific answers for who, why, and when, there were people up here, long before written history, climbing this mountain in moccasins and wearing animal hides. It's hard to imagine. Perhaps some of the same things that draw us here are the same things that drew them. Sitting there, taking this all in, I reflected on those early climbers. Even the first white people to summit this were just wearing cowboy boots and denim jeans. And I considered that in light of all the gear and footwear we consider necessity today. I couldn't help but wonder, what other things in the modern world do we view as necessities, but really just weigh us down? The mystery of the enclosure might never be solved, but for me, simply the knowledge of people climbing this immortal mountain centuries ago is enough to keep me fascinated for a lifetime. Well, my friends, I think I've got 7 miles with my name on it, and probably a burger and fries or pizza waiting for me in Jackson. As always, appreciate you guys' support so much.